Mozart has the most striking openings. And it's so striking because he provokes the dissonance at the moment where the fruition of the harmony comes, like in this fantasy I just started. Or in the very dissonances called or nicknamed quartet, which I played just earlier. Delayed resonances, delayed resolutions, delayed suspensions, and always modulations in strange keys. All that to return by a smiling cadence in an absolutely deeply touching cadence. And these effects are so striking and so difficult to play on the piano because if you're aware of them, you are over-present them, and if you try to carve the edges and just sort of put them under the carpet, they still come at you. So it's important to take it at heart. So much at heart. The first example was the slow movement of the G major concerto, K453. Who would have guessed what will come after Sturm und Drang? After the dramatic storm, there is the welcoming, smile, hugging cadence. dissonances are not so sometimes demonstrative. For instance, in the 40th Symphony, in the dominant pedal before the recapitulation of the first movement, he has this moment so if you take it alone, this double appoggiatura, G sharp opening and B and E flat closing on the dominant dissonance of the sevenths. Of course, slowly played, it takes even more dissonant statement. But in the tempo, he introduces it, and I think the striking moments in music are not so much expected. They're just all of a sudden jolt you like an electric flash. And afterwards, one can always try ways to voice it, but the striking openings are often like that. They're meant to strike in attention, like the accacciatura in the opening of K310 starts with that painful dissonance, and in the slow movement in the middle of it, about taking the time to bleed the pain. The 7/6 inverted suspension that gives this sense of enormous pain, because the minor second is so dissonant and so close, and the resolution is just this minor third in minor, obviously, compared to in the 40th Symphony, which is a flashpoint, and here it's that's when the suspension, creating that psychological dissonance more than only the dissonance in resonance compared to the consonants, creates a sense of tension, and is so striking. People don't even realize the violence that this it is, especially in the 19th century, where you have so much music for convenience, in sense that you have to write it in the forms of expectation. So it's form prevails contents, and you don't just start with your feelings, you just place the form, and then the contents overtakes in the Romantic era, and you write sonatas, poems in one movement. But in the 18th century, you're still very much formal. So you introduce inside this very formal piece some drops or elements of intense emotional music that comes translated by this kind of dissonances that are painful resolutions of suspensions or appoggiaturas. The coda of the K511 rondo. It is a 9/8 but minor on the tonic. He could have done six flat 2 becoming a minor flat 9. Obviously a minor flat 9 is the same. There are ways to avoid these collisions that create this painful dissonances, which are so expressive for the emotional content of the essence of the music within the context of the form. Haydn writes a concerto. And in the middle of the slow movement, and then that's all. So proportionally it's not as much as if you start with Berg Sonata, immediately the clash of the dissonance, or Prokofiev too. Of course, we are into the 19th, 20th century where the dissonances become part of the consonants because of the fact that we don't resolve them, so they become just like in Stravinsky's Petrushka. Obviously, he could have written, since he's on the dominant seventh, but he uses the ninth, just like Scriabin in one of his etudes. It's imitational of harmonica. The mouth harmonica has naturally the seventh by the thirds. And since Petrushka is supposed to play the harmonica, if you wanted to do dominants that are clean without nines, you do them. But of course, this dominant never have to resolve in C major. It's not like functional harmony, as they would say. Thankfully not. It's dominant ninth as a unresolvable, not needing to resolve, almost consonant, as if he wrote. It doesn't have the function of the dominant seven, therefore the tension, the resolution, the dissonance. But then the dissonance becomes expected. In the Rite of Spring, well, Stravinsky was exactly the example of the composer who took dissonances and sort of made them, used them as consonances. He used to like to say that he likes to compose on out-of-tune upright pianos because it gives him that sense of the grit of the dissonance. I don't know if it's true, but or because of the opportunity that he had when he was young to do that, not having a better piano. But it's possible. At least one thing is for sure, is that Mademoiselle Boulanger was invited to the Rice University speaking series, and in the late 20s, 1920s, late 1920s, and she was saying that today's dissonances are consonances are yesterday's dissonances. And that is true, because certain dissonances today don't shock us because we have heard so many more. So the level of dissonance that has to shock us has to be so much more. And in fact, the dissonance doesn't have any more the same action on our psyche, since we're sort of tamed by so many. She used to say that in Monteverdi's time, the major and minor thirds were considered as audacious dissonances. So, how much differently people reacted to these elements of musical manipulative discomfort for the psyche. And Thomas Tallis wrote a motet called O Natalux. finishes with a cadence. Subtle dissonance between the leading tone and the modal descent of 7. Kissing or crossing. Instead of avoiding it simply with the unison of the dominant. The fact is mostly vocal music, and the waves of the voices on the acoustics of churches had enhancement of the resonances of the harmonics, like the opening of the Fauré's Requiem. It's on a D minor triad, but it happens to be so that in the church acoustic with a lot of echo, you hear the waves of the harmonics of the major third into the minor triad. So by waves you hear a distantly hinted F sharp that disturbs the cleanness of the triad. Of course you don't have it in major, because it's a natural harmonic to be the major third and not the minor. Could explain why in big churches Bach's endings, the famous Picardy third we call it, at least here, regardless of this regional authenticity or not, the fact is that in an acoustic that has a lot of beats for the waves to resonate, when you finish in a major triad, is without ambiguity. But if you do you hear waves of which are not disturbing on the piano because we don't have enough resonance, but in a large pipe organ in a big church with several seconds echo, it becomes an issue. And of course we translate it also in the sense of finishing positively a minor key work with a major chord. Again, what we as humans attach as emotion to the modes. Minor sad and major happy. Of course this is very reductive, but the fact is that we feel it when we hear a long piece in minor ending in a major chord. In D minor book 2, he finishes. In a soft major that almost appears unnoticed because of the chromaticism that's everywhere. And at the end, so when Mlle. Boulanger was giving the example of major minor thirds in Monteverdi, and you see Bach. For Bach, chromaticism is an obsession because it's sort of the virtuosity of the tonality, the focal point of the complexity. This is just the statement of the ascending minor, descending minor, or the harmonic minor. In major, you wouldn't make the same amount of various options because the two tetrachords that are the constitution of the major scale are equally built: tone, tone, semitone, tone, tone, semitone. So inevitably, like Lego bricks, they go on top of each other and they become another key because the bottom tetrachord of C major is equally built to the top one. So the top one of C major becomes the bottom of G major. But then you cannot do in minor since you have different constructions for the bottom four and the top four tetrachords in Greek tetra 4. So it's a subtle mode, the minor. It's actually several modes than rather one. And already Thales experimented colliding the two. And Mozart's example of the fantasy in C minor. Also, when you attack frontally this pact. But in major you don't do that, because there isn't such thing. You just have a leading tone and a tritone for only an essential dissonance. And when you want to start strikingly in your Beethoven, you start with the diminished seventh, which is the double tritone chord, which by excellence doesn't go anywhere and is everywhere, and is sort of like the question mark of tonality. So, but the dissonance of it is less obvious because it has to be resolved to be dissonant. If not, you just stay on it. And Chopin, who was also in search, obviously, of a striking opening of his sonata in D flat minor, probably inspired himself from this opening of 111 by Beethoven. So openly throws in the diminished seventh limbo. He also has that leap of the diminished seventh in Beethoven. It's important to observe how many composers try to attempt, even sometimes succeed, to start with something that shocks the expectation and then work their way through. We are always left to remember these. I mean, of course, the most famous is Beethoven's where the thematic material is reduced to a rhythmic pattern more than the melodic pattern. It's just about almost, as they call it, knocking, fate knocking. And so he's already reduced the melodic line to nothing and keeps not even a dissonance necessity, even if it does have the seventh, I would say in this case the second, because of the G being in fact not going to the E flat, but the ostinato, one part of it goes to E flat. Just like in second partita. We've suspended ostinato on G. Here it's also interesting facts to observe, because you realize that ostinato overtakes so many of the musical ideas of composers who use it as a grounding, and then the dissonance as an intensification of the sense of pain or emotion or anger that they want to bring to the listener, the psyche, really, talking directly to the psyche, not so much to the brain. Therefore sometimes that sense level of shocking dissonance is no more perceived as such in today's world, where we have been perhaps overexposed to it gratuitously, it's important to find ways to hear it from within, rather than just for the effect that it produces. In the development of 960, by Schubert sonata, he has this so when you start and you go this opening on the second of Beethoven in the first sonata uses in Schubert in his development is a minor triad. So there is a point where the composer chooses to resolve that intensification of the dissonance. It can become an everlasting, exponentially expanding dissonance. The more you don't resolve dissonances, the more you collide more dissonances, the more the dissonance loses its dissonant function by the fact that it's no more resolved. And so it becomes just a random dissonance. And of course, one can voice in a way that in the playing the dissonance appears more or less shocking. If I do only voicing out and highlighting the top part, the chromaticism of the melodicity of it, I don't enhance the voice that by delaying becomes dissonance. Therefore, there is in the capacity of the pianist's voicing a way to highlight or shadow the dissonance. And the dissonance then becomes a manipulative psychological element of the music, depending how much the performer wants to bring it or not. And I think the performer's hearing is very important, of course, because it determines all these elements of tension and release. And for instance, in the song by Schumann called Mondnacht, moonlight in the night, again, the importance of the ostinato, in this case, suspended in the right hand. Here's a passing tone. And Schumann gives to the voice the extra tone, which brings it to an E sharp, passing tone with a natural, which nonchalantly passes in the left hand passing tone of the piano, but not striking, not overtly attacking the dissonance, more like a bittersweet passing tone, if I may call it so, compared to if he had just chosen the natural consonants. It would be still very pretty, because it's so calm. And in each stanza he re-says it again. And then sometimes in his third stanza he goes. So double attack of the appoggiatura, and then the passing tone, creating a dissonance with the melody. So those are provoked dissonances for that sense of inner tension, which again could have been willingly avoided. To imagine, but it's so strange. Or it's ridiculous to even imagine. about the edge of this dissonance that creates the sense of tension, and more than that, of sometimes literally pain. And composers in the past, since the tonal system prevailed, were using it within it as a sort of a spicing of it, or zesting of it, or giving it this kind of extra tension that suggests the sense of pain or expectation. Whenever in the atonal music, or going towards a tonality, atonality, it doesn't sound so dissonant. Or the opening Dr. Berg of Scriabin's Fifth Sonata. His Chord of Ecstasy. It doesn't have the functionality to resolve. It's just suspended in the air. Like Stravinsky's doesn't go there and shouldn't go and won't. But then the more atonal, the more randomly sounding music, because de-hierarchized from tone tension, the releases of dominants and tonics, music becomes crafted intellectually and emotionally, but dislocated from its expectation of tension and release that basically locks the tonal system from the 7/5, the tritone, and everything goes towards that tension, and how you delay it, or how you avoid it, or how you cunningly suggest something else with the 6th degree instead of the first. It's always a question in tonal system about delaying the resolution, and so it could be a suspension that creates a dissonance, or it could be an attacked dissonance by the appoggiatura, appoggiare, which means to lean, or a cacciatura, which means to climb from above or under, and so it adds that spice to the sound, or to the harmony, that gives us the sense of excitement or of pain that we immediately recognize within the tonal system. Outside of it, we are lost, because everything sounds so unrelated, except if one can and should study the alphabet of the given composer's language. But within the tonal system, the language being universal, the circle of fifths, and they are locked by on the 7th by a tritone diminished fifth, and from there on everything else is a play on delaying the resolution until the end. If not, you'll finish right away. As a beautiful example of the opening of Schubert's Arpeggione Sonata, which starts with the ending. This is striking, but it is so avoiding in this case any possible tension almost. It's just 1-5-1. One with a 6th chord, 4 and 1. It does not. It reassures us that we are in this landscape where we're going to listen to the melody of the theme afterwards. It sort of settles the music in. Doesn't need to be dissonant in a provocative or tension-driven, shocking way. And we have this sense of well-being also in Beethoven's Appassionata. So harmonically we are very well. No tension, no release, just tonic and dominant, stated in triads. No diminished 7th. it suggests immediately something mysterious and something perhaps is going to happen. Nor does Schubert start with cheesy, but it's fun to imagine some kind of alternative harmonization that would induce some of this effect to the diminished sevenths. And we notice that the ingredients we are aware of, but the connection of the ingredients, the way you mix them, makes the whole magic in the cooking. And the composers whom we serve with such devotion are often the composers who know how to manage the assets in question and not just give us either it's a shocking dissonance at the opening or perhaps embedded inside something further. Nevertheless, they choose the proportions and we just follow them. And from time to time, because the music is so meaningful to us, we overindulge, at least some of us, I guess, more than others, depending of the eye of the beholder. Some aspects touch more some people than others, and there are aspects in everything. F minor, book 1. Or the voicing of the step-by-step motion of quarter notes, which gives you more sense of calm and pace than because if you really listen to the arpeggios, then some of them end up by having dissonances, like in this case the resolution of the trill. That termination of it connects to the G and just brushes it very discreetly, but nevertheless it is. So if you enhance it, you go, oh, what happened? That was emotional. Or if you just prefer to highlight the melodic line of the quarter notes, it's a way to put a shade on it and just like, I'm not going to deal with this. I prefer the long line of the quarter notes. Performer a structural voicing or an emotional voicing or no voicing at all, but the point is that it's so much the responsibility of the performer on the piano how to highlight what to bring out in order to make the point. This is a calm movement, this is an intense movement, or this is a section that has this and that. So it's really about listening to the performer's hearing prior to the playing, and then our hearing is translated by what made the performer be so moved, touched, or emotioned by what, or just bedazzled even by the music he or she plays for us. So in fact, unless the audience knows the score and the performer is just a recitant, in this case it's more limited because everybody seems to know what's going to happen before it happened. But if the audience is there to receive a storytelling, like a child listening to a bed story that's told, then the performer is the narrator, becomes the composer of the spot, on the spot, not instead but during the time being, and becomes the storyteller. And the storyteller can enhance dramatic effects, or not to scare the child, just try to make it a little bit less scary in the amount of adjectives used, or the cruelty or graphic cruelty of some of the story's actions. I think it's so much the responsibility of the pianist how to translate, rather than interpretation, translation of the storytelling of the composer. short notes, delayed notes, expected notes, echo notes. And sometimes the dissonance is not to play another melodic note, but stay on the same note. And the last one of the repeated insisting notes is the dissonance. because in the slow movement of the 101 Sonata by Beethoven, he has this fragmented embryo of slow movement, but fragments of many slow movements which are not developed, and he uses very wisely and perhaps very cunningly the grace note for the different type of intervals, the consonant third or 10th, the passing tone starting to be but not really dissonant 4th or 11th, and then the tritone, and this diminished 5th, but the notation is grace note for each. So when the interval is dissonant, tense, and tense like a rope, and he uses it to give it descent on it, and slides down the staircase of the tritones, using the diminished 7th dissonance, like an unstoppable failing. But in the opening, so the notation is always grace note, but in fact each grace note has a different meaning because of the interval it creates. So perhaps a light and quick, a more thoughtful 4th, and really delayed diminished 5th, because it's not an interval that you do as an easy leap. It's an intense, dissonant, tense interval. But per se the notation indicates grace note, so therefore the notation doesn't tell us as much as the harmonic and melodic progression that gives us the psychological tension towards the stretch and the almost breaking of the rope. So perhaps there should be in notation grace notes for 8th notes, grace notes for quarter notes, grace notes for dotted quarter notes as a grace note to signify the volume, the amount of intensity or expression of delaying. Since he says Sehnsucht, which means yearning, expecting, longing.